There are two kinds of illegal in war. There's the kind that gets you court-martialed, and there's the kind that gets you home alive. Staff Sergeant Marcus Delaney learned the difference on March 14, 1970, in a maintenance tent at Forward Operating Base 2 in Con Nam Province, South Vietnam. We took a hacksaw to a perfectly good M79 grenade launcher and started cutting. The weapon he destroyed was worth $327, according to Army property books. The weapon he created didn't officially exist. 7 inches of barrel hit the dirt. For inches of wooden stock followed. What remained looked like something a bank robber would hide under a coat. Compact, brutal, and absolutely forbidden by every regulation Delaney had sworn to uphold when he joined MACV-SOG, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, the most classified unit in the war. The unit that didn't exist, running missions into countries America wasn't fighting in, using tactics the Pentagon would never acknowledge. His team leader, Lieutenant Paul Vickers, watched from the tent entrance. Said nothing. Didn't have to. They both understood what headquarters 800 miles away in Saigon would never grasp. The jungle had different rules, and those rules were written in blood. The standard M79 grenade launcher was 29 inches of solid infantry firepower, a break action, shoulder-fired weapon that looked like someone had crossed a shotgun with a mortar tube. Since its adoption in 1960, it had earned a reputation as the platoon leader's artillery. A single soldier could carry the explosive punch of a small artillery piece, dropping 40mm grenades on enemy positions up to 400 meters away. The weapon was elegant in its simplicity. Pop the barrel locking latch. Gravity pulls the barrel down, exposing the breech. Load a single 40mm round. Snap it closed. Flip the safety forward. Aim using the ladder sight. Fire. The high-low propulsion system kept recoil manageable, a clever bit of engineering, where the initial charge fired in a high-pressure chamber, then vented into a larger low-pressure chamber, giving the grenade enough velocity to arm and travel, while keeping the shooter's shoulder intact. In theory, it was perfect. In practice, it was a liability. The problem wasn't the weapon's effectiveness. The M406 high-explosive round it fired was devastating. Enough explosive to produce over 300 fragments traveling at 1,500 meters per second, lethal within a 5-meter radius. Spin activation safety prevented premature detonation. The round armed itself after traveling roughly 14 to 27 meters. The M79 could also fire buckshot, flechette smoke, illumination, and CS gas. Versatile, reliable, deadly. The problem was everything else. 29 inches long. 6.5 pounds. Single shot. And if you carried it, you couldn't carry a rifle. Army doctrine assigned the M79 to a dedicated grenadier who would carry only a .45 caliber M1911 pistol as backup. Fine for conventional infantry, walking in platoon strength with mutual support. Suicidal for MACV-SOG. SOG teams operated in 6 to 12-man units, sometimes smaller. They inserted by helicopter into Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam on reconnaissance missions that lasted days or weeks. Their job was to watch, report, and avoid contact. But avoid was the operative word, not guarantee. When enemy troops numbered in the hundreds or thousands and friendlies were counted on 2 hands, every man needed to be able to fight his way out. A grenadier carrying only a pistol was dead weight the moment contact broke bad. And contact always broke bad eventually. Delaney had watched it happen. February 8th, Recon Team Python, operating along the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. Their grenadier, Specialist Vincent Ortiz, carried a standard M79 and an M1911. The team walked into an NVA base camp. 300 enemy soldiers where intelligence said there should be none. The ambush was immediate, brutal, and close. Ortiz got off 2 grenades before the enemy closed to within 50 meters. At that range, the grenades wouldn't arm. He drew his pistol. 7 rounds of .45 ACP against AK-47s. They found his body 3 days later when a rescue force finally made it through. He'd killed 2. They'd killed him. That was the calculus SOG teams live with, deep in enemy territory. No backup. No artillery support that could reach across international borders that officially didn't exist. When the shooting started, You had seconds to produce overwhelming violence, or you died. A grenadier who couldn't shoot back between grenade shots was a man dying slowly. The solution wasn't authorized. It wasn't in any manual. It violated direct orders from MACV headquarters prohibiting modification of weapons without armor authorization. It was also the only thing that made sense. Delaney wasn't the first to figure it out. Field modifications have been happening quietly across SOG team for months, maybe longer. Nobody talked about it. Nobody filed paperwork. You just did it. Hoped your team leader looked the other way, and prayed you didn't get killed before the weapon proved its worth. The shortened M79 has traveled under different names depending on who you asked. The sawed-off, the Shorty, the point-blank special. Most guys didn't call it anything. It was just the tool that kept you alive when the jungle lit up. Delaney's version came out to roughly 21 inches overall. The barrel was cut to about 9 inches, still long enough to impart spin stabilization to the grenade, short enough to carry in a modified canvas holster on his hip or chest. The stock was cut down and reshaped, leaving just enough with a brace against the shoulder for aimed fire, or to fire one-handed in an emergency. Total weight dropped to maybe 5 pounds. He wrapped paracord around the forend for better grip, and stitched a simple canvas carrier that could hold 6 extra rounds. What he sacrificed was range and velocity. The shorter barrel meant less time for propellant gases to accelerate the grenade. Muzzle velocity dropped from 76 meters per second to maybe 60, 65 at best. Effective range fell from 350 meters to perhaps 200. The ladder sights were gone, cut away with the barrel, leaving only point-and-shoot instinct. The reduction in barrel length also meant increased muzzle blast and flash, potentially giving away a position. What he gained was survival. The shortened M79 could be carried alongside an XM177 E1 Colt Commando, the compact 11.5-inch barrel carbine version of the M16 that SOG teams preferred. Delaney could move through jungle with a primary rifle in his hands and 4 rounds of immediate, devastating firepower on his hip. In close terrain, which was all the terrain in SOG's area of operations, 200 meters was generous. Most firefights happen at 50 meters or less, often much less. The sawed-off performed exactly the same as the full-length version at those ranges. And unlike the standard M79 Grenadier, Delaney could transition to his rifle in under 2 seconds if the enemy closed past minimum arming distance. The weapon's compact size created other tactical opportunities. It could be hidden under indigenous clothing during disguise insertions. It could be carried in the cab of a UH, one Huey without smacking into door frames during insertions and extractions. Most importantly, it could be brought to bear in terrain where a 29-inch weapon would snag on vines, branches, and 1,000 other things that filled triple canopy jungle. Lieutenant Vickers finally spoke. That doesn't exist. Roger that, sir. If it falls into enemy hands, there's no serial number to trace. Delaney had already filed the number off the receiver. What weapon, sir? Vickers almost smiled. Get your gear ready. We insert at 0500. Recon Team Viper. Delaney's team was 8 men. 2 Americans, Delaney and Vickers. 6 Montagnard tribesmen, indigenous fighters from Vietnam's Central Highlands, trained by SOG, loyal to the death, and far better in the jungle than any American could hope to be. Their mission was designated Prairie Fire, the code name for operations into Laos. Intelligence reported a possible regimental headquarters somewhere along the Sekong River Valley. Coordinates for artillery if it could be confirmed. Get in, observe, report, get out. 3 days for maximum. They inserted at dawn. 2 UH, 1 HUEs dropping through morning mist into a landing zone carved from jungle by previous bombing runs. Rotors never stopped turning. The moment boots hit dirt, the helicopters climbed out, their turbine scream fading into silence. 8 men alone in a country that didn't officially have American soldiers in it, hunting an enemy that outnumbered them by hundreds to 1. The first day was quiet. They moved 3 kilometers, slowly, carefully, every man scanning his sector. The jungle was all sound and shadow. Birds, insects, monkeys crashing through canopy overhead. The heat was physical, pressing down like a weight. Delaney carried 60 pounds of gear. his XM-177E1 with 10 magazines, the sawed-off M79 with 8 rounds of mixed ammunition, water, rations, survival kit, radio batteries, and a camera for documenting any finds. The modified grenade launcher rode in its canvas holster, positioned so he could draw it with his right hand while his left maintained grip on the carbine sling. They move in a tactical column, 5 meters between each man, one Montagnard on point, reading the jungle, Vickers behind him, Delaney in the middle, the rest spread out to the rear, with the team's radio man carrying the PRC, 25 that could reach across the border back to the launch site in Vietnam if everything went wrong. Every hour they stopped, listened, moved on. Standard SOG operating procedure. Never break pattern, never assume you're alone, never trust silence. The second day, they found the trail. Not a footpath, a road. Wide enough for trucks, freshly used, running northeast to southwest through terrain that supposedly had nothing in it but trees. Fresh tire tracks. Footprints. Cigarette, but that still smelled of tobacco. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't one trail. It was a network of roads, paths, and supply routes running through Laos and Cambodia, feeding North Vietnamese troops fighting in South Vietnam. Finding one this well-developed meant major logistics traffic, which meant enemy units nearby to protect it. Vickers hand signaled, observe from concealment. They melted into the jungle 30 meters off the trail and waited. Minutes turned to hours. Then they heard it. Engines. A convoy. 5 trucks, canvas-covered, moving slowly south. Then troops, maybe a company's worth, moving north on foot in a loose column. Then more trucks. This wasn't a trail. It was a highway. Vickers photographed everything, marked coordinates, whispered updates to the radio man. The mission was a success. They had what they came for. Now came the hard part, getting out. They backed away from the trail carefully, putting distance between themselves and the enemy, before turning east toward the extraction landing zone 12 kilometers away. The jungle swallowed them again. By nightfall, they'd covered 4 kilometers. They moved another 2 after dark, then stopped to set up a night defensive position. 8 men in a tight circle, claymore mines facing outward. Every man awake in shifts listening. Dawn on day 3. They were close. Another 6 kilometers, and they'd hit the extraction LZ. The helicopters would come in at 1,400 hours. Get there early. Set security, mark landing zone, leave. But at 0847, the jungle exploded. The NVA patrol hit them from the north. 30, maybe 40 soldiers, moving fast. The point man saw them first, fired a burst, and the forest dissolved into chaos. AK-47s on full automatic. The distinctive crack of Kalashnikov, rounds snapping through bamboo and teak. The team returned fire immediately, every man shooting at movement, sound muzzle flashes. The Montagnards were screaming coordinates in their own language, directing fire. Vickers was shouting into the radio handset, calling for air support that wouldn't arrive for 30 minutes minimum, if it could cross the border at all. Delaney saw shadows moving through the green. He fired controlled 3-round bursts from the XM-177E1, the little carbine barking, ejecting brass that bounced off leaves and disappeared. 30 meters. 25. The NVA were assaulting, trying to overrun them with speed and numbers. Standard communist tactics. Close fast, overwhelmed with volume of fire, exploit the moment when defenders are reloading. He emptied the magazine, dropped it, slammed another home, fired. The XM-177, E1 ran dry again. He could see them now. Khaki uniforms, pith helmets, faces twisted with effort and fear. 20 meters. Too close. Too many. His right hand dropped to the sawed-off M79 at his hip. Muscle memory. He'd practiced the draw 100 times. The weapon came out smooth, his thumb flicking the barrel locking latch as it cleared the holster. The grenade launcher opened as he brought up, the shortened barrel pointing at a cluster of NVA troops rushing through the underbrush. He didn't have time to load. The chamber was already loaded. He kept one in the chamber always. Safety on until needed. Flicked the safety forward. Aim at center mass of the group. Fire. The M79 thumped. A deep, hollow sound that carried even to the staccato hammering of automatic weapons. The recoil was sharp but manageable, rolling through his wrist and forearm. The 40mm M406 high-explosive grenade left a shortened barrel at reduced velocity, but still spinning, still stable. It covered the 20 meters in less than half a second. 14 meters to arm. The impact fuse functioned exactly as designed. The grenade detonated in the middle of the enemy assault. The explosion was flat, percussive, a crack of overpressure followed by the whine of hundreds of steel fragments sleeting through bamboo and flesh. 3 men went down immediately, shredded. 2 more staggered, hit by peripheral fragmentation. The assault faltered, stopped, as survival instinct overrode training and men dove for cover. Delaney didn't watch the effect. He was already breaking the action open, the spent casing ejecting automatically. His left hand went to the canvas carrier, fingers finding a fresh round by touch alone. Load. Close. Safety off. Aim. Fire. The second grenade hit a tree where muzzle flashes had been strobing. Another explosion. More screaming. The NVA attack dissolved. Not a rout. Professional soldiers don't panic, but a tactical withdrawal. They broke contact, fading back into the jungle, dragging wounded, leaving dead. The entire engagement lasted maybe 3 minutes. It felt like 3 hours. Silence returned. Not peaceful silence. Ringing ears, ragged breathing, the creak of trees settling, the smell of cordite and torn earth. Delaney's hands were shaking, adrenaline dump hitting as the immediate threat passed. He reloaded the M79 methodically, muscle memory taking over. Checked the XM170-71. Fresh magazine. Chamber around. Safety on. Stay ready. Vickers was on the radio, voice comm, reporting contact, requesting immediate extraction. The landing zone was 4 kilometers away. They couldn't stay here. The NVA would regroup, return with reinforcements. SOG doctrine was simple. Break contact, move fast, get to the extraction point, get out. They moved. Fast march, all stealth abandoned. The jungle was no longer neutral ground. It was hostile, every shadow hiding potential ambush. They covered the first kilometer in 18 minutes. Heard movement to the north, more troops, tracking them. The NVA weren't giving up. Why would they? Americans deep in Laosman intelligence value, propaganda value. A captured SOG prisoner meant names, methods, future operations compromised. At kilometer 2, they hit another enemy patrol. Smaller this time, maybe 15 troops. The fight was brief, savage. The team had surprise, initiated ambush, poured fire into the NVA column. Delaney used the XM177 E1 exclusively, conserving grenades. They killed or wounded half the enemy force in the first 10 seconds, then ran. Standard SOG ambush. Hit hard. Don't stay to count bodies. Move. Kilometer 3. The extraction LZ was close. They could hear helicopters now. Distant but growing louder. Cobra gunships inbound. Huey's behind them. The cavalry was coming. Just had to survive long enough to link up. The jungle ahead opened into a small clearing, maybe 70 meters across, elephant grass and scattered trees. The extraction point. The team broke from the tree line, running now, desperate to reach the center before. Automatic weapons fire erupted from the far side of the clearing, a perfect L-shaped ambush. The NVA had guessed their route, gotten ahead of them, set up a hasty defensive position. The math was simple and terrible. 8 SOG troops in the open, caught in crossfire, no cover, against entrenched enemy forces with clear fields of fire. This was where teams died. This was where you found mass graves 3 days later after the enemy stripped bodies of identification and weapons. This was the nightmare scenario every SOG operator trained for and prayed would never happen. Vickers went down first, took a round to the thigh, collapsed into the grass screaming. 2 Montagnards hit dirt and returned fire. Another was hit, spinning, dropping his weapon. The radio man was yelling into the handset, giving coordinates, screaming for immediate gunship support. Delaney saw the enemy position clearly now, 70 meters distant, Maybe 20 troops behind a fallen log and termite mound. Muzzle flashes strobing. Tracers arcing across the clearing in flat trajectories. They had machine gun support. The slower, heavier hammering of a belt-fed weapon, probably an RPD, 70 meters. The sawed-off M79 was rated for 200 meters effective range with the shortened barrel. 70 meters was well within capability. The problem was that enemy fire was so heavy that standing to aim meant dying. The grass was maybe 3 feet tall. Enough to conceal when prone, not enough to hide when vertical. The team's return fire was building. Control bursts, trying to suppress the ambush long enough to maneuver. But maneuver where? The clearing was a kill zone. Back into the jungle meant abandoning wounded and getting hunted down. Forward meant assault across open ground against superior numbers. Delaney made a decision that wasn't decision, just action without thought. He rolled left, came up on one knee, brought the M79 to his shoulder. The enemy position was clear, concentrated around the fallen log. Aim high, account for drop, fire. The grenade arced across the clearing, a lazy tumbling flight that seemed to take forever. It dropped behind the enemy position and detonated. Not a direct hit, but close enough. The explosion threw dirt and splinters, killed 2, wounded 3. The machine gun went silent. He was already reloading. Break action. Eject casing. Load fresh round. Close. The enemy fire intensified. They'd seen him, recognized the threat. Round snapped past his head, impacted into dirt beside him. He dropped prone, rolled right, came up in a different position. Fired again. The second grenade hit the termite mound directly. Fragmentation and pulverized earth erupted. More screaming. The enemy fire slackened. Not stopped, they were still shooting, but reduced, disorganized. Men were diving for cover, reacting to explosions rather than executing ambush plan. The machine gun crew was gone. The L-shaped ambush was collapsing into desperate defensive fire. Vickers was shouting orders, organizing counterassault. 2 Montagnards were dragging the wounded toward cover. Delaney fired his third grenade into the tree line, where secondary positions were firing from. Fired his fourth. The XM-177, E1 came back into his hands. He was running forward now, the whole team moving, closing distance, pouring fire into broken enemy positions. The NVA broke, ran, left weapons and wounded. The ambush had failed. The clearing was theirs. The helicopters arrived 3 minutes later. 2 Cobras circling high, their miniguns and rockets suppressing any remaining enemy forces. 2 Hueys flaring into the clearing in a storm of rotor wash and turbine scream. The team collapsed into the helicopter bays, the crew chiefs pulling wounded aboard. Vickers was applying pressure to his thigh wound. Face gray with shock, but still conscious. The Montagnard who'd been hit in the shoulder was grinning, adrenaline overriding pain. 1 man hadn't made it, hit in the head during the ambush, killed instantly. They brought his body. SOG never left anyone behind. The helicopters climbed out, engines screaming, pulling away from Laos back toward Vietnam, crossing an invisible line on a map that meant safety for some values of safety. Delaney sat in the door, legs dangling over jungle that receded below him. The sawed-off M79 across his lap, for spent casings rattling in the carrier. He was numb, exhausted, alive. Vickers leaned over, had to shout over engine noise. That thing saved us. Delaney nodded, didn't trust his voice. They're going to ask questions about the weapon. Let them ask. They never did. After-action reports mentioned effective use of organic firepower and successful break contact under enemy pressure. The classified mission files recorded 8-man team, 1 killed in action, 3 wounded, enemy casualties estimated at 25. No mention of unauthorized weapons. No investigation into how a grenadier produced volume of fire inconsistent with standard M79 capabilities, because the people writing those reports understood the truth that headquarters never would. On the ground, in contact, regulations don't matter. Only results matter. Only survival matters. The M79 grenade launcher was a phenomenal weapon when used as designed, shoulder-fired, single-shot, dedicated grenadier. But MACV-SOG wasn't fighting the war the weapon was designed for. They were fighting a war where 6 men operated deep behind enemy lines, where contact meant you were already outnumbered 10-1, where a weapon that forced you to choose between grenade launcher and rifle was a weapon that got you killed. The sawed-off M79 was the solution operators created because nobody else was going to create it for them. It violated regulations. It voided warranties. It probably violated several articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice regarding destruction of government property. It also worked. Word spread quietly through SOG. More teams started carrying shortened M79s. Not all. Some guys stuck with the standard version, preferring maximum range and power. But for point men, for team leaders, for anyone who needed to move fast and hit hard, the Shorty became standard kit. Still unauthorized, still unacknowledged, still the difference between walking out of the jungle and being carried out. The weapon's existence remained hidden for decades. The Vietnam War ended. MACV-SOG was declassified, its operations finally acknowledged. Veterans started talking, writing memoirs, showing photographs, and there in grainy images of men posing before missions with a shortened M79S, tucked into improvised holsters, slung across chests, held casually in hands that had used them to devastating effect. Military historians started asking questions. How many had been created? Who authorized it? Where were the modification records? The answers were simple. Unknown, nobody, and they didn't exist. The sawed-off M79S were field-expedient modifications created by soldiers who recognized a tactical problem and solved it with a hacksaw. No paperwork. No authorization, just necessity and a willingness to accept responsibility for breaking rules that would have gotten them killed if they followed them. Some specimens survived the war, brought home by veterans who couldn't part with the weapon that had saved their lives. Most were lost, destroyed in combat, left behind during extractions, or turned in after missions and quietly disappeared into arms rooms where nobody asked uncomfortable questions about barrel length. Today, photographs remain. Oral histories. A few examples in private collections, their provenance impossible to verify officially, because officially they never existed. Marcus Delaney survived his tour with MACV-SOG, rotated home in 1971, accepted discharge, and disappeared into civilian life. He worked construction in Oregon, married, raised 2 children, and rarely spoke about the war. When he did talk, it wasn't about medals or heroism. It was about tools, about solving problems, about how sometimes the right answer isn't in the manual. The sawed-off M79 he carried that day in Laos never made it home. It was lost during a later mission, dropped during an emergency extraction when the team rappelled from a hovering helicopter while taking fire. The weapon fell into jungle and was never recovered. Maybe enemy forces found it, puzzled over the modifications, tried to replicate them. Maybe it's still there, buried in mud and vines, rusting slowly under triple canopy. Either way, it served its purpose, kept a man alive long enough to matter. The story of the unauthorized 40mm grenade launcher isn't really about the weapon. It's about the fundamental gap between how wars are planned and how wars are fought. Headquarters thinks in terms of doctrine, regulations, standardization. The battlefield thinks in terms of survival, adaptation, and whatever works right now when people are shooting at you. The best militaries find ways to bridge that gap, to give frontline troops enough flexibility to solve problems while maintaining enough structure to prevent chaos. The worst militaries enforce regulations even when those regulations kill people. MACV-SOG operated in that gray space where official military structure ended and survival instinct began. They broke rules constantly because the rules assumed warfare that bore no resemblance to what they actually faced. They used enemy weapons when those weapons worked better. They wore indigenous clothing when uniforms made them targets. They modified their own equipment when issued gear wasn't good enough. And when a 29-inch grenade launcher was too long, too heavy, and forced them to choose between explosive firepower and rifle capability, they took a hacksaw and created the weapon they needed. The military never officially acknowledged the sawed-off M79S, never issued them, never added them to supply catalogs or training manuals. But they didn't stop them either. because the officers who would have had to stop them, the commanders who sent teams into Laos knowing they might not come back, understood that sometimes survival requires breaking rules. Sometimes the illegal weapon is the one that brings people home. That truth echoes across every war ever fought. Innovation happens at the edge, where doctrine meets reality and reality wins. The soldier who modifies his weapon to fit his mission. The pilot who flies tactics the manual says are impossible. The medic who uses supplies in ways never intended, but which save lives. War rewards results, not compliance. The medals go to heroes. The survivors go home. Often they're different people. The sawed-off M79 grenade launcher represents that principle in steel and wood. A weapon that shouldn't exist, that violated every rule, that proved itself true when abstract regulations met concrete bullets. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important innovation comes not from laboratories and test ranges, but from maintenance tents and jungle clearings. From people who recognize that the choice between following orders and staying alive is no choice at all. Think you know another weapon that saved lives by breaking rules? Drop it in the comments. Hit that like button if this story reminded you why we honor the soldiers, not the regulations. Subscribe, because there are dozens of stories like this that never made it into official histories, and every one of them deserves to be remembered.